can change the world, it's your choice, your choice. What's going on in the world today? Tune in and take a listen. One voice, we on a mission. We gotta stop the violence and stop the killing. Cops certain blacks like we don't matter. Problem at the problem and we need us. We gotta speak up, we gotta set standards. We gotta protest, we need to make banners. What's your thoughts? Tell us your ideas. What's your thoughts? Express your opinion. You can be the one to make a difference. You can be the one, it's your decision. You can be the one, it's up to you. You gotta choose. All we gotta do is stay together. We gotta treat our women better. Teamwork, make the dream work. I'm sick of seeing RP painted on the front of a t-shirt. Instead of talking down on the next man, give him a hand and help him get back up. We gotta stop the hate, we gotta stop the hate and spread the love. One mic, one voice. You can change the world, it's your choice. One mic, one voice. One mic, one voice. You can change the world, it's your choice. One mic, one voice. You can change the world, it's your choice. One mic, one voice. You can change the world, it's your choice. One mic, one voice.
Welcome to the One Mic, One Voice show, building the collective conscience, a show that is created to give space where your voice, ideas, and informed opinions can be heard, appreciated, and debated. I am Michael Eric Owens. Well, wow, it took a lot to get the show up today. Richard had to work some magic. We got out of YouTube jail. So we're back up on YouTube, folks. Very excited to be here with you. The title of the show today is Voting is Your Right. And I think it's important, again, the title is Voting is Your Right. I think it's important for us to get into this dialogue. Last week we talked about, I had some political folks on, and we had some conversations around the different candidates on the Democratic side. And so I think it's important that we get into this dialogue about voting. I remember being on a talk show, radio talk show, and this is a few years back, and a gentleman called in, younger gentleman, called in and said the topic was voting. We were talking about voting, and we just got something from our listeners that the chat is turned off. Richard's going to deal with that, so we definitely want to hear from our listeners. And so this guy, he said that he doesn't vote. There's no reason to vote. Black people should vote. Now, I took issue with that, and I'm not going to go into the diatribe that ensued from that particular exchange, but it didn't go well for him. And so I think it's important that we understand that voting is our right as citizens, as participants in this democracy. And it didn't come easy. So we're going to take a historical look at how we got even to the point where we could vote, the pushback against that, the violence that ensued against black and brown people for trying to vote. And then ultimately, we're going to end with the voter suppression that exists today. I mean, why do they want us not to vote? That is the question you need to ask yourself. Why do they want to keep you from participating in this democracy. Participatory democracy is what we need. We need engagement. We need people not just marching and protesting. We can march and protest till we are blue in the face. I believe in marching and protesting. Don't get me wrong. But unless we exercise our right to vote, nothing will change. It will only get worse. Now, I want to take you a little bit through memory lane for some of you scholars out there that know a little bit about. In the 1900s, there was a pamphlet called "To the Color Man of Voting Age in the Southern States." It was a pamphlet for Southern states for black men, because black women were not given the right to vote at that time, women period. And the things that qualify a colored man to vote in the Southern states is what this particular pamphlet was to outline. And it gave 10 things that qualified a colored man to vote in Southern states. So nowadays, it's becoming more difficult, but the idea is that you go in, you are a citizen, you have your address, and you should be able to vote, right? And we're going to get into the numbers when it comes to those that are saying that we need voter ID and all these other kind of things, which is basically a modern day Jim Crow strategy to prevent black and brown people from voting. We're going to get into those numbers, but before that, there was this, these 10 things for Southern states. And again, I want us to understand that we're talking about looking at the history. And so this pamphlet starts off by saying, in order that you may know what will be demanded of you to vote under the Constitution and laws of the several Southern states, we give below the substantial requirements of each. So it talks about in Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, and Texas. And then it gives a brief kind of synopsis. You must pay your poll tax. You must register and hold your certificate of registration. If you can read and write, you can register. In Alabama, Louisiana, and South Carolina, if you cannot read and write, you can register if you owe, get this, $300 worth of property. Now, think about this in 1900. So, number one, we didn't get 40 acres and a mule anyway. And so the idea of owning property worth $300, I don't know. Maybe somebody can look and see what the equivalent of $300 would be today in 2020. In Arkansas, Georgia, you must pay your poll tax. In Florida, Texas, Kentucky, and West Virginia, you must reside in the state. And then it says down here, this is just a synopsis of when you open up this particular pamphlet, which was highly circulated. It says a man convicted of almost any crime. Let me repeat that. A man convicted of almost any crime may be barred from voting. May be barred from voting. Right. Okay. So let's look at some of these specific state requirements. And it says here, let's look at Mississippi. Must reside in the state 2 years and 1 year in the election district or incorporated town or city. Must have paid all taxes on or before the first day of February of the year of the election and shall produce his tax receipts to the election officer. Persons under 60 years of age must pay an annual poll tax of $2 to the state, which may be increased $1 by the county. Must be registered in order to do so, must be able to read any section of the Constitution of the state, or shall be able to understand the same when read or give a reasonable interpretation thereof. So if you couldn't, they would tell you, and then you would have to give a satisfying interpretation of the Constitution. Now, get it, this is for colored men. It's not for white men. This is for colored men, right? It says here, by decision of the Supreme Court, a person otherwise qualified has a right to be registered whether he has taxes are paid or not. Any person convicted of a felony, adultery, larceny, wife beating, miscegenation is forever barred from voting. Wow. This is for a colored man. I think it's pretty sad that you get citizenship, but on top of citizenship, you are required to not only produce, but in some cases to own, in some cases to interpret, and in some cases, if you have been convicted of almost any crime, you can be barred from voting. You see, in 2016, the black vote turnout rate declined for the first time in 20 years. We talk about the presidential election. It fell to 59.6%. 59.6% in 2016. After reaching a high of 66.6% in 2012. Now, we know what happened in 2012, right? Barack was back up on the ballot, right? The 7 percentage point decline from the previous presidential election is the largest on record for blacks. Get this, though. It is also the largest percentage point decline among any racial or ethnic group since white voter turnout dropped in 1972. So with Barack Obama on the ballot that year, we're talking about the number of black voters also declined, falling from about 765,000 to 16.4 million in 2016, representing a sharp reversal from 2012. With Barack on the ballot that year, the black voter turnout rate surpassed, get this, surpassed that of whites for the first time. We had black on the ballot. Black motivated you. A black man motivated you. Now, I'm not going to say Barack didn't motivate me. Barack vote motivated me. But I still would have voted if Barack wasn't on there. For some of us, the only time we in the history that we surpassed the white vote is because somebody black was running? Do we vote? And this is the thing that I get into with the Bernie or bust people. Are we voting for a platform or are we voting for a person? Are we putting our faith into a party or are we putting our faith into a person? When your voting is personality driven, when you are motivated only because you like the person, that's a problem. Because again, our title today is voting is a right. You don't vote because you like the person. You vote because it's your right as a citizen to participate, to let your voice be heard and known. I think we look at voting through the wrong lens. And I want to take a moment. Let's talk about the history. What we're going to do is storyofamerica.org, the history of resistance to minority progress. Folks, let's take a listen, and we're going to come back and we're going to examine this.
My father had a master's degree But in the South, he didn't have protected voting rights. So when we talk about this history of voting rights, I'm born in '63. That means in my lifetime, this is not some ancient history. It's only been in my lifetime that we've had the protections of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. So what I say to people when you talk about voting rights and why people get so upset when people now today try to come up with 21st century versions of voter suppression and 21st century versions of Jim Crow and poll taxing, and they act as though, what's wrong? Why are you all complaining? They are ahistorical. After the Civil War, something phenomenal happened called fusion politics, unique to the South. Lincoln Republicans joined with former slaves or freedmen to rewrite constitutions all over the South. Right here in North Carolina, 1868, they rewrote the Constitution. The promises of Reconstruction was that we're going to reconstruct the nation to be more close to its noble ideas, what it said on paper, not what it did in practice. By 1870, in North Carolina, you had more African Americans serving in the General Assembly than you have today. Those legislators, joined with progressive whites, wrote some of the most progressive education laws, labor laws, voting laws, criminal justice laws. I'm talking 144 years ago. By 1872, however, there was a violent reaction by the former planters, and they called it the redemption movement. They needed to redeem America, and particularly out of the South, from the influence of black political power. They needed to stop fusion politics. Klan was formed in 1872 as a political organization. And by 1898, November 10th, 1898, there was a vicious, violent riot called the Wilmington Riots. Duly elected blacks and whites were run out of office. White supremacists took over the state legislature. And the first thing they attacked, there were always 5 things they attacked. They attacked educational laws, they attacked labor laws, they attacked fair criminal justice laws, they attacked taxes. They wanted to cut taxes so that the government wouldn't have any money to fulfill the promises that had been made to the former slaves. And they attacked voting rights. If your grandfather was a slave, then you couldn't vote. Or poll taxes, you have to pay something in order to be able to exercise your right to vote. White supremacy is rewritten into the laws of the state. And by 1910, black voting power is virtually nothing, 0. So the Reconstruction movement was ended by the late 1800s. Then you get the 1960s. That's the second Reconstruction. Dr. King, March on Washington 50 years ago, a man in whose shadow we stand, talked about the emancipation, but he also said that things were not yet where they should be. From 54, Brown versus Board of Education, all the way to the death of Dr. King, you have this massive movement, blacks and whites, Jews and Gentiles, all coming together, reconstructing the nation. How was that stopped? They attacked voting rights, they attacked education, they attacked progressive tax policy, but they also attacked leaders. Killed Martin, Medgar, Malcolm, Kennedy, Robert and John, hundreds of others, and that shut down the second Reconstruction. Then you have something strange happen. You have a guy named Barack Obama to run for the presidency in 2008. And guess what he does? He runs a campaign rooted in the idea of fusion politics, like you had in the 1800s, like you saw in the 1960s. And guess what? He wins in places like North Carolina, in the South. And how does he win? The electorate is broad and it's deep and it's young and it's old and it's LGBT and it's black and it's Hispanic and it's Asian and it's people who want to push America beyond the vestiges of racism. And so his election represents the possibility of a third Reconstruction. And it just might work this time. It just might work. The demographics are changing. More black and brown people. Younger folk are not as bound as they once were. But that new electorate scares the whatever out of those who have a homogeneous view of life. It does not fit their worldview. So what do you see? An all-out assault once again. This attack on voting rights starts immediately after President Obama is elected. since 1776, when North Carolina was a state, we have never had voter ID. We've had something called signature attestation. You sign your name, and if you lie, you get a 5-year felony. That's sufficient. In order for my father had a master's degree, but in the South, he didn't have protected voting rights. So when we talk about this history of voting rights, I'm born in...
All right.
My father...
Okay. My father. No, we're not going back to that. Fusion politics. The rewriting of America. The reconstructing of America. You see, we have to understand the history. This idea of getting engaged in a way that rewrites America. You see, if you're not in the process, you can't change the process. You only can be affected by the process. Clearly, as Reverend Barber, what he was talking about, the civil rights activists for progress, for the story of America.org, this fusion politics, this idea that, yeah, we got in there, 1870. Blacks were not only in Congress, but all across the country, blacks had become justice of peace and in law enforcement and all types of positions that allowed for change to take place. But then you talk about this redemption movement, the pushback, in other words. Let me kind of draw an arrow to make America great again. The pushback. Progress, regress. But why? Because you have an elite class that has been in charge of America, the direction of America, those who get awarded in America, those who retain power in America. And when that is threatened, what happens? You put people in power that can reverse what has transpired. The only way that they can do that, listen, Barack Obama won Southern states. There was a hope. There was a desire for change, just like in Reconstruction, just like in the Civil Rights Movement of the 1960s. There was a desire for change, not just among black people, brown people, Latinos, Asians, progressive whites. There was a desire for change. But what happened? You see, what you have to understand, that it's not about one victory. It's not about winning one battle. It's about winning the war. And the war has been raging since the origin, since the colonists came over here and took land from the native peoples. And since Africans set foot on the continent, the war has been raising for who is an American, who has the rights to citizenship. And just because we win a battle, just because we have the Voting Rights Act of 1965, just because, yeah, that's a battle won. But there's still a war. After Reconstruction failed, why did it fall? Because you had the rise of the Ku Klux Klan. You had the rise of Jim Crow. You had the black codes. You had all of these things were put in place to strip black folks of their citizenship. You see, you need to understand the history, understand the importance, understand the impact, understand your duty as a citizen. You say, I'm not living in those times right now. Well, I'll challenge you on that. I'm going to challenge you on that. Folks, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to look at this fight for the right to vote. Hang in there. We'll be right back.
Join us for the 7th annual Night with Ralph Ellison Gala at the Oklahoma History Center, February 29th, 6 p.m. A night of fun, music, dance, and readings of Ellison's works. To purchase a ticket or a sponsorship, go to ralphellisonfoundation.org or call 405-788-0566.
Hey, this is Jamie Lindbergh, host of Upbeat Urbanism, a podcast where we seek to have an open dialogue about what it takes to create healthy, intentional, sustainable communities, one conversation at a time. Each episode is an interview with a city planner, leader, developer, real estate professional, or community builder. To listen, search for Upbeat Urbanism wherever you find podcasts. Follow us on Twitter at UUrbanism and on Facebook at Upbeat Urbanism. Devote yourself to your community around you and devote yourself to creating something that gives you purpose and meaning. Until then, keep it upbeat.
All right. We back. Back on YouTube, too. I'll try to stay this time. Yeah, I'm not going to go into details on what happened. But trust me, I don't believe it was my fault. I was just trying to tell the truth. But you know the truth will get you in trouble, folks. It will set you free, too. But I'm here to tell you, the truth got me in jail. But I survived. Voting is your right. That's our title today. And I think it's kind of, I want to say that we have an obligation as citizens, not just to this country, but to each other, to exercise our right to vote. I think anyone that says voting doesn't matter, well, and again, we can go into the argument with the Electoral College and all. I get all of that. I'm not ignorant when it comes to politics. I understand gerrymandering. I understand all of that. But what I'm going to say to you is that it's not, the end result is important, ultra important. But being in the process is even more important. I think that if you don't vote, just shut up. You shouldn't even criticize the direction of the country. You shouldn't even weigh in if you have not exercised your right to vote. It's like being on a basketball team and you don't practice, and then you come to the games and you're criticizing those out on the floor. You're not participating. Shut up. That's what I wanted to tell that young man. I didn't say that exactly, but not in so many words. I think I did pretty much say, just shut up. Because what you're talking about is nonsense. Let's look at this fight to vote. Voices of America did this video. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Let's take a listen or look at it if you're following me on YouTube. We'll be right back.
Hundreds of peaceful African-American demonstrators marched for voting rights in Selma, Alabama 50 years ago. As the civil rights demonstrators made their way across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, they were met on the other side by a group of state police officers who attacked them. violent images outraged the nation, drawing national attention to the denial of voting rights for millions of African Americans.
I had to go to the courthouse, stand in line, and vote.
50 years later, civil rights activist Nims Gay returned to the Birmingham courthouse, where he and other blacks questioned white county officials who rejected their constitutional right to vote.
What you're really trying to do is intimidate these people, and by making them stand in the raids, keep them from registering to vote.
Why do you think you're superior to me? Don't you realize from one blood all nations flow? Or is that something you don't understand? And see, that irritates them. But see, don't let them worry about nobody. Irritate nobody. When you're right, you're right, and when you're wrong, you're wrong.
Following legal challenges, blacks were allowed to vote. He says the fight was hard but worth it.
A voteless people is a hopeless people. Don't care whether you're black, white, green, or gray. If you can't vote, you're messing up.
Retired teacher Gene Smiley was among the first blacks allowed to vote in Montgomery, Alabama.
A lot of people around in Montgomery and surrounding areas, so many of them were really afraid to go and try to vote.
If you had a job, just trying to register was enough to get you fired. And in addition to that, they would even fire some of your relatives.
Days after Bloody Sunday, Hank Sanders marched with Martin Luther King and thousands to Alabama's capital, Montgomery.
The power of the vote seemed so powerful to those who had it that they didn't want anybody else to have it. And they were doing everything they could. They were using every mechanism at their disposal to stop the vote.
The accomplishments that we made didn't occur by themselves.
Civil rights lawyer Fred Gray, who represented King, won a court ruling to allow the successful march from Selma to Montgomery.
It is the effort of American Negroes to secure for themselves the full blessings of American life.
Gray says less than 5 months later, President Lyndon Johnson signed the 1965 Voting Rights Act into law.
Voting rights was a key because it opened the door for so many other things. Because if you get people to vote, they can elect individuals to office. These individuals who are elected in office have the power to appoint hundreds of other people to elective office.
I do believe.
Back in Birmingham, Nims Gay sings the civil rights anthem that inspired him and so many others in this struggle for equality.
The Lord is on our side today, deep in my heart.
Chris Simpkins, VOA News, Birmingham, Alabama.
We shall overcome someday.
We shall overcome someday. Deep down in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday. There was a struggle, folks, to get the right to vote. Our comments are open now. If you want to comment, as always, like, subscribe, share this video, support the show. A voiceless people is a hopeless people. I like how he said that. Or a voteless people is a hopeless people. And I think that's true. If you think about the reason why that young man said to me that there is no reason to vote, he has no hope that his vote matters. So a voteless people is a hopeless people. He has no hope in the system changing. He has no hope in his vote being part of a decision that makes his life better. Are you hopeless? Are you hopeless? The condition of a hopeless person is probably one of the most dire situations anyone can be in. Now, don't get me wrong. From time to time, everyone goes through stress, depression, anxiety, difficult times. But in the midst of that experience, there has to lie a glimmer of hope. There's got to be some light in the midst of your darkness. If you have lost all hope, where do you go? What do you do? Who do you turn to? Some of us are in that space when it comes to voting. Barack Obama ran on Yes We Can, this idea of breathing hope back into the possibility of every American being part of the experience of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And many people bought this hook, line, and sinker, right? But it didn't turn out like they wanted. You see, many of us are ignorant of history. I was telling a colleague of mine when I was at University of Arizona, North Central, and I told her, I said, I'm happy that Barack is running, but if he wins, there's going to be a great pushback. And man, she got really upset at me. She said, I can't believe America's about to do a great thing, and it means our country is changing, and I can't believe you're being so negative. The difference is I knew history. That's the difference. And what happened? What happened? We got Donald Trump. A voteless people is a hopeless people. It said in the video from Voices of America, it talked about people being afraid. We take a right and we utilize it, or we don't utilize it. We simply throw it away. We simply give it no value. We think nothing about voting. But here are people that wanted to vote so badly that they were willing to risk their life and their income. The video talked about how you could be threatened to be fired if you voted, or your relatives could be terminated from employment. Let me ask you today, what if that was tossed your way? If any of y'all thinking about going down there and voting, you're not going to have a job when you come back. In spite of the violence, in spite of losing one's income, people went to cast their vote. Why? Because as President Johnson said, what did he say? Black folks wanted full blessing of American life, to be fully participating in this American experience. Now, I know there's challenges. Don't get me wrong. There's some things we control and things we don't control. What we do control is taking ourselves into the ballot box and casting our vote. That's what we control. Now, we're going to talk about voter suppression, but I'm talking about your desire, your knowledge of history that tells you, man, so many pay the price. How can I squander my right to vote? What that young man was telling me on that particular talk show was he didn't care about history. He didn't care about the people that got lynched. killed, run out of town, jailed, lost employment. He didn't care about that because it wasn't worth it. All them lives were wasted in vain. He didn't understand the magnitude. That's why I took issue. It ain't worth voting. I don't vote. It don't make a difference. You're ignorant. Yeah. And we have too many black people like that are ignorant. They don't know their own history. They don't know the sacrifices that have been paid for them. They are simply ignorant. Because if you understood, I understand. My grandparents, when there was a voter registration drive in Winona, Mississippi, they allowed for those people that came down from the north and other places, the registered people, to stay in their tiny little home that when I was growing up didn't have running water. Didn't get running water until the 70s. Had an outhouse. In that tiny little home. And how do I say to myself, how do I look myself in the mirror and go, I'm not going to vote. It ain't worth it. That would be like to spit on their graves. They thought it was worth it to risk their lives and the lives of their children, which one of them have to be my beloved mother. Shame. March 7, 1955, in Mississippi. Reverend George Lee. Both of these I'm going to give you in Mississippi. One of the first black people registered to vote in Humphreys County used his pulpit and his printing press to urge others to vote. White officials offered Lee protection under the condition he end his voter registration efforts. But he refused. And guess what? He was murdered. That same year, in August, Brookhaven, Mississippi, Lamar Smith was shot to death on the courthouse lawn by a white man in broad daylight while dozens of people watched. The killer was never indicted because no one would admit they saw this white guy shoot this black man. Smith had organized blacks to vote in that recent election. We could go on and on about the sacrifice. You see, we are obligated to vote. We're obligated to the Constitution, to this country, but even above that, to our foremothers and forefathers. Now, I want to get into this thing called voter suppression, but I'm going to take a quick break. I want to talk about what is happening now. What is going on right now? Why are they trying to prevent you from voting? Prevent me from voting? The power of the vote. You see, some of us don't get it, but those in power, they get it because they realize you can remove them. So all I got to do is prevent you from doing that. We'll be right back.
This is Dr. Paul Ketchum, and I fully support One Mic, One Voice, and I recommend you do the same.
Hi, everyone. This is Roxy Davis.
And this is Deborah Burris. And we are
the Roxy by Design Show. Our show is designed to bring healing as we share our stories while God redesign our lives.
So take a ride with us.
So you can find us at
Podbean, iTunes,
Facebook and Twitter,
and
blackandstudios.com. So thank you everyone for listening to the Roxy by Design Show. You have a blessed day.
We love you.
I'll try to end on a high note. Yeah. This is serious talk, though. I'm just saying. I mean, we got to have these conversations, folks. You need to have this conversation with your family members, your friends, your colleagues, especially black people. I'm going to be honest with you. Oh, what? I don't know. We shifting it up today. You need to have this conversation. You, personally. First of all, you need to be convinced of your own desire and right to cast your vote. If you're not convinced, if you're hopeless, remember, what did he say? A voteless people is a hopeless people. If you're not hopeless, now I know the present situation and everything that is going on can leave a person without hope. Again, where do you go when you are hopeless? Who do you talk to? What do you do? I don't know. I don't think I've ever been hopeless. Oh, I've been down now. Some folks even thought I was down for the count. I've been in the valley now. I've been low. Yeah. But I've never been hopeless. Like the South Carolina motto, while I breathe, I hope. In other words, while I have breath in me, I hope. Brighter days have to come. The sun must shine again. The dawn must break. I mean, we have to be a people of hope. Look how far we have come. Maybe we have not arrived, but we've come very far. How can you not have hope? So if you are a hopeful person, you need to have conversations with those around you about this right, this necessity, this urgency to vote. Oh, come on now. King pleaded. Come on now. Some of the greats have sacrificed. How can you squander what has been given to you? So this is what you must do. Now, but we must be aware that even today, we've talked about from the beginning, we've talked about Reconstruction. We've talked about the requirements to vote. We've talked about during the 1960s. We've talked about the history of trying to take that away. We talked about the pushback. When there's progress, there's pushback. We've made that crystal clear. And now that is happening again. But I believe now what they want to do, what I mean they, those in power, many of our elected officials on a local, state, national level, all over, they want to maintain power. They see the demographics are changing. They know the white majority is going to be the minority. They know this. It's not only predicted, it's already underway. You can't change it. But what the few can control the masses if the masses don't understand the power of the vote, the power of the democratic process, how to participate in it. They can always do that, right? There were more slaves on the plantation than the master in his house, but yet and still he ruled, right? Because he pit them against each other, because they wouldn't allow them to read and write, right? The tools, the mechanisms to prevent you from understanding that not just your vote, but all of our votes will bring about change. Let's look at what is happening. This is by PBS, folks. They did a segment on what is happening with voter suppression. Take a listen.
3 weeks from today, voters will head to the polls for the midterm election. But recent news of alleged voter suppression in some key races has many wondering if they're still able to cast their ballots. To take a closer look at where voting rights stand right now, I'm joined by Carol Anderson, professor of African American Studies at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. She's the author of the book, One Person, No Vote: How Voter Suppression is Destroying Our Democracy. Professor Anderson, welcome to the NewsHour. I want to begin by asking you about some more recent conversations around voter suppression. They tend to look back just a few years at a 2013 Supreme Court decision, that decision to roll back some of the protections of the historic 1965 Voting Rights Act. What's your take on how significant that move was?
Oh, the gutting of the Voting Rights Act in the Shelby County v. Holder decision of 2013 was significant. We had already had the sowing of the seeds of the erosion beginning in the 2000 election, where you had the language of voter fraud really coming to the fore there, and then being embedded in federal law with the Help America Vote Act, although voting fraud had been debunked by the time that had happened. But by the time we get to the 2013 election, the ground had really been sown for this, and it, in fact, just let all of the kinds of voting rights abuses run loose. We see that in many of the states that have been cleared, had previously been under pre-clearance from the Department of Justice. And we also see that in states that hadn't been pre-cleared but had taken on the mantle of stopping supposed voter fraud.
When you say pre-clearance, I want to clarify for our audience, these were states that had a history of discriminatory practices when it came to voting statutes. They no longer had to get federal approval to change those rules. But when you say significant, who did it affect? What population? How many people?
And so where you see the effects really come from what I call the Obama coalition. In the 2008 election, you had, he brought, with his incredible ground game, 15 million new voters to the polls, overwhelmingly African American, Latino, Asian American, young, and poor. When we begin to look at these voter suppression laws, that's the group that is targeted. That is the group where issues such as voter ID, issues such as closing voting polls, issues such as voter roll purges, all of those begin to take into account and hit each one of those groups, sometimes simultaneously, sometimes one more than the others, but that's where we're seeing it. And we're seeing it in terms of, for instance, in Wisconsin, with the voter ID law. After the 2016 election, a study was done, and it was found that 8% of whites were stopped from voting by the voter ID law, but 27% of African Americans were stopped. We're seeing with voter roll purges in Ohio, for instance, where 2 million have been purged off of the rolls so far. But in one of those major purges, 25% came primarily solely out of Cuyahoga County, which is Cleveland, which has a sizable African American population.
Professor Anderson, you mentioned the voter ID laws, voter roll changes as well. A lot of people who are putting those steps into place at the state and local level say these are necessary to protect the integrity of our elections, to continue to make sure that they are fair. So why wouldn't we want our voter rolls updated? Why wouldn't we want people to have to show an ID when they vote?
And that's one of the great ways the way voter suppression works, is that it sounds reasonable until you see how it's operationalized. And when you also understand, for instance, that the issue of voter ID is based on the lie of voter fraud. And what I mean by that is that Justin Levitt, a professor out of California, did a study, and from 2000 to 2014, he counted up all of the votes in all of the elections and came to 1 billion votes. Out of that, he identified 31 cases of voter fraud. 31 cases out of 1 billion votes. That's hardly the massive, rampant voter fraud that we consistently hear as needing to have all of this protection via voter ID. But based on that lie of voter fraud, and I say that lie because even when the proponents of voter fraud are really called to bring out the evidence of it, such as Chris Kobach out of Kansas or Gregory Abbott out of Texas, they cannot identify massive, rampant voter fraud. At best, Greg Abbott was able to come up with 2 cases in all of Texas. And so protecting the integrity of the ballot box then is not the issue, because the ballot box is not under siege by voter fraud. And so what we get then is that kind of sounding reasonable with we need voter ID, but for what? And the way that the voter IDs are crafted is like North Carolina looked at the data by race on the kinds of IDs that African Americans had and didn't have, and then crafted the law to go for the ones that African Americans did not have. And that is what we're seeing. In Alabama, for instance, Alabama said you needed to have a government-issued photo ID.
Professor Anderson, I'm hearing you say this is a problem around the country then, because often we talk about it like it's in the South, but you've named a number of states there where your studies have shown this occurs. And we'll have to leave it there for now. Professor Carol Anderson of Emory University, thank you very much for your time.
1
Thank you.
billion. Out of 1 billion votes over this time period that the professor outlined, you had 31 cases. Got a comment from Arthur that says, in my experience, people think change takes too much effort and energy, and if it is for the better, but doesn't understand that changing things can make life easier for everyone. Change does take a long time. A long time. Right? It's I often tell people we didn't get here overnight. You're not going to change it overnight. It's a long, steady process. And we should not just want to change things because it makes our lives better. How about our children's lives? How about for the next generation? Right? That's what they did. That's why they walked across the Pettus Bridge. They didn't think necessarily that their life was going to, they were trying to change America, fusion politics. They were trying to change and reconstruct America for everyone, for future generations. 1 billion, 32, 31 cases of voter fraud. Now, so the next time somebody says to you that we need voter IDs and we need all that, 31 cases over that span of years of 1 billion votes. Voter fraud is a joke in this country. And it's language that is used to subjugate and prevent people from voting. Simple as that. It's interesting when it talks about here about this idea of that 2013 decision. Well, states that were known to be discriminatory toward blacks, minorities, had to petition the federal government anytime they wanted to change their voting laws. Anytime. This is what people don't understand. Like, this is where it became really crucial for us now, is because when the Supreme Court said, no, you don't have to do that anymore. Nah, you've been good. What did they do? They immediately started enacting laws that will suppress the vote of minority people. Wisconsin, voter ID, 27% of blacks. Right, the voter turnout is low among blacks, let's be honest. And for those who are trying to vote, 27%, that's significant, right? Cleveland, city of Cleveland, 25%. I think we need to understand that there is a concerted effort. You know, it's like this. Look at this. It's like a duality, right? It's like me suppressing my own self, right? I am hurting my own self, right? I'm doing their work. They're trying to prevent me, but because of my hopelessness, because of my ignorance, I prevent myself. So I fulfill their wishes. You would think just out of spite of what someone's trying to take from you that you would exercise your power to vote. That you would not allow for someone to rip you off and take your right from you. I'm not going to let anybody take their right from me. No one. The struggle has been to have more rights, not to lose the rights that I have, to be treated with dignity, to be treated with fairness, to be able to petition my government, to not be discriminated against in housing, in education, and employment. On the books, it says I have that right. I'll be damned if I will sit back and let that right be infringed. But the right to vote, who cares? Who cares? My vote doesn't matter. You're a fool if you believe that. You are on the periphery of this society and you're not engaged. Matter of fact, if you don't vote, then you are invisible. Nobody sees you. Nobody hears you. And if you're not seen or heard, you don't matter. Because no decision is made to benefit you. It's made to benefit those who are seen and heard, those who are visible, not invisible. My hope is that we don't. I don't care about excitement. I really don't. You hear what? We need to energize the base, and we need to. I don't need anybody to excite me, to energize me, to make me feel like, you know what? Things are going to be really different. No, I don't need that. What I need is to exercise my right to vote, and for those who come and get my vote to do what they say they're going to do. I don't need excitement. I need action. I need things done. I need change. I don't need a rally. I do not need a rally. I do not need a march. What I need is change. What I need is people listening to minority concerns and making a difference. I don't need to get excited about you. I need for you to do what you say you're going to do. That's what I need. Then maybe I can get excited about what you do. I'm not going to get excited about what you say. People say things all the time, right? It's about what you do. We are coming up on a very crucial election. Crucial. Probably, you hear this all the time, most important election in my life. Up until this point, it would be the most important election in my lifetime for me. And I guarantee you, I will cast my vote because history will speak of us. Somewhere in the distant future, a scribe will reach down deep into the archives of our time, and what will she find? Will she discover that we overcame our differences? Will she find that out of many we became one? Or will she find that we solved nothing and remain a divided peoples? Yes, history will speak of us.
We can make a difference if we try. We can be the change that's in our lives. All we gotta do is work together. We gotta raise our children better. We gotta stop the hate, and spread the love.
One mic, one voice. You can change the world, it's your choice. One mic, one voice. You can change the world, it's your choice. One mic, one voice. You can change the world, it's your choice. One mic, one voice. You can change the world, it's your choice. Your choice.
Thank you for downloading the One Mic, One Voice show. This episode is brought to you by Blacken Studios. To learn more about Blacken Studios, go to blackenstudios.com or visit their Facebook page. The views and opinions of the One Mic, One Voice podcast show do not reflect the views of Blacken Studios or our other sponsors.